Ladies and gentlemen, hey, hi, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Thanks so much for stopping by. Today, my friends, we're jumping back into the world of Modern Warfare, and this is easily, without a doubt, one of the most highly requested videos that I have on the channel. Pretty much every single time I upload a new video, you guys are always asking, Zach, what are the best settings to use here in Modern Warfare and here in Warzone as well? So today, we're basically gonna be covering everything, all the best settings to use for console, for PC, for Modern Warfare, for Warzone, you name it. These are hands down the best settings to be using in the game right now. So if you guys enjoy the video, or if you just find it helpful, let me know by dropping a like on it. And of course, if you guys are new here, we are on the road to 500,000 subscribers. So if you guys want to stay up to date with the latest Call of Duty news and intel, best class setups, updates, and leaks, pretty much everything going on in the world of Call of Duty, we are covering it right here on the channel. So feel free to subscribe with your notifications turned on to stay up to date with all of that. Now, as I said, we're pretty much going over all of the best settings for console, for PC, everything, you name it, multiplayer, Warzone, the whole nine basically. So starting off with keyboard and mouse, honestly, I'm mainly a controller player. I do play on PC. I go back and forth between controller and keyboard and mouse. I prefer controller though personally, but as far as this goes, this is pretty much all personal preference. You know, sensitivity, aim down sight sensitivity, all this stuff is going to come down to your setup, your mouse, and what you're comfortable with at the end of the day. So really, there's no universal best settings in this category. When it comes down to the general settings though, this is where we get a lot of stuff going on. So for starters, if you are playing on PC, you get the massive advantage of playing with an increased field of view. This is going to give you such a huge advantage, especially in Warzone, in the Gulag. This is all around just like the way to go in my opinion. I love the fact that you can have an increased FOV. Unfortunately, if you're on console, the option does not exist. Hopefully in the next gen, that'll be a thing. But personally, I play on a 111 FOV. Pretty zoomed out, but I really do like that a lot. As far as my brightness goes, this is more personal preference. I play on about a 60. And then as we move through most of these, honestly, these don't really matter too much. Once again, more so personal preference. But when it comes to heads-up display, this is actually some pretty important stuff, specifically when it comes down to the minimap shape. Basically, you always want to be using a square minimap simply because it gives you a bigger minimap. And obviously, the bigger the better in this case. You're going to be able to see more area around you. You're going to be able to see enemies on the minimap at a further distance, especially in Warzone. When you see those red dots highlight when people are shooting at a further distance, you wouldn't always necessarily be able to see those if you were playing on that circular minimap. So square is 110% the way to go here. Then as far as the minimap rotation goes, once again, this is more so kind of personal preference. However, I do like to have it enabled just because I think that's a bit easier for callouts. Then as we continue throughout the general options, of course, if you are on console, you're not necessarily going to have all of these, but most of this is just personal preference at the end of the day. I like to see how many FPS I'm getting. I like to see my latency, my packet loss, but most of this is just whether or not you want to have it on your screen, not necessary by any means whatsoever. Now, when it comes to graphics, this is probably what I get asked about the most. Again, if you're on console, this is not really going to apply to you all that much, but if you are on PC, I get this question all the time, Zach, how do I make my game look like yours? And unfortunately, the answer is you can't. My game doesn't even look like I make my game look, which I know doesn't make sense, but let me explain. Basically, I play with like just regular settings, no NVIDIA filters, nothing like that. I do nothing extra to my gameplay. However, when I go ahead and edit my videos, I do throw on color correction when I'm editing to make the gameplay look brighter and more saturated and just better looking all around. So unfortunately, if you do want those brighter colors and just to have the game pop a little bit more, it's not really a super accessible thing. Like I said, my gameplay doesn't even look like it does in the videos when you guys watch them, but what you can mess around with is the actual look of the game when it comes to textures and whatnot. And most of this, once again, is going to be individual to you. All the display settings here are pretty much individual to my setup. They're going to be different for yours as well. Keep in mind, when it comes to my actual settings for textures and everything, I'm using a 2080 Ti in my computer so I can run things on a pretty high setting and not really have to suffer any frame loss. It might be different though for you depending on what graphics card you have. But typically, I like to run everything on high as much as I can. Texture resolution going to be on high. Texture filter is going to be on high. Particle quality is also on high. Bullet impact and sprays, I don't know why you'd want to turn this off. I always have that enabled. Tessellation, I do have disabled. I don't really think that makes a huge difference. It will make your game look a little bit better, but honestly, I don't think, especially like look at the example here, I don't think I'm paying attention to the cracks in the rocks that much when I'm running through the Warzone or running through in multiplayer, so that's not really a huge deal to me. Now, as far as shadows and lighting goes, shadow map resolution is going to be on normal. The cached shadows are going to be disabled. Particle lighting, I've got on high. DirectX ray tracing, I have disabled because that will actually destroy your frames in game unless you just have some sort of like monster computer. So unfortunately, I'm not able to play with ray tracing on. Obviously, it would make the game look a whole lot better, but when it comes down to Warzone and when it comes down to multiplayer, I'm not really focused on how great the game looks. I obviously want to go for performance there over visuals, so definitely have that disabled. For ambient occlusion, I have that set to both. Then for screen space reflection, I have that on high. Then when it comes to post-processing effects, some of these options you are going to have on console, and that's going to be the world motion blur, the weapon motion blur, and also film grain. And these are the three you really want to pay attention to here. So honestly, I cannot stress this enough. You absolutely 100% of the time want to have world motion blur and weapon motion blur disabled. These really are not going to help you in any way, shape, or form. In fact, they're actually going to hinder you more from my experience. Basically, the way I look at it is if I'm trying to spot an enemy at a longer distance, so this really applies to Warzone in this case, if I have motion blur on and I'm moving around trying to track them or even just trying to spot them, if I can't see clearly because I have motion blur on, that's going to make everything way more difficult, and obviously, you don't want that. So just make your life easier, turn off motion blur, turn off weapon motion blur. It's going to make things so much easier. And then also film grain, I have that set to 0 just because it's going to make things a bit clearer as well. If you have this turned up, things are going to be a bit more noisy, and I think it's just easier to see things and easier to spot things if you have this set to 0. Now, when we get into audio, once again, this kind of comes down to what you're using, but there are also some more universal principles, I guess you could say, that can apply to everyone. Personally, I do play on home theater mix. This is what I think sounds the best in my headphones. You know, I can hear footsteps on this mix better than others, so I like to rock with this. However, this is something I had to test out. I went through a lot of different audio mixes. The standard one, boost high, boost low, home theater, this personally worked out the best for me, but you definitely want to test that out. However, when it comes down to the actual volumes of everything, this is a bit more universal. Master volume is all set to whatever you want to have it as. I need it at 33 just so it's not too loud, not too quiet for gameplay or for myself. Music volume, you can pretty much just turn this off. Unless you want to have some tunes on in the background, this isn't going to help you in any way, shape, or form. Dialogue volume is more so important in Warzone compared to multiplayer. You can hear things like enemy dropping into your AO and stuff like that, so you want to have that turned up enough where it's prominent in game. You know, if you're in game and you're talking to your friends, enemy over here, enemy over there, you want to be able to hear enemy dropping into your AO above all your chatter and above all the game sounds, so that's definitely a pretty important one. And then effects volume is also super important. This is going to be gunfire, footsteps, all the regular in-game effects, so obviously you want to have that one turned up as well. Now, this next part of the video is going to be very, very important as well. This is all about controller settings, and obviously, if you're playing on PS4, if you're playing on Xbox, chances are you're using a controller. If you're playing on PC, you may or may not be using a controller. If you're like me, you go back and forth. But there are a ton of things you can do here that are really going to help you out. So as far as button layout goes, personally, I like to play on tactical. Now, I do use a SCUF controller. I am a SCUF partner. I've been using these controllers for a long, long time now. I think they are a huge help. I've got paddles on the back, so I can use these for jumping and meleeing and all sorts of stuff like that. So when I have the tactical button layout, that's going to allow me to use the thumbstick to crouch, so I can drop shot easier. I can slide cancel easier. Tactical, I think, is probably the best button layout out there, but you may prefer something else. That sort of comes down to you. Then, the next big option here is going to be dead zone. I get asked about this all the time, and unfortunately, this is not some universal setting. You know, you cannot go out and say, hey, 0.19 is the best dead zone setting, because this is individual to your specific controllers. So, you know, Johnny's controller might have a dead zone of 0.07, Eric's controller might be 0.02. This is entirely different. It really depends on what your controller is like. If you have stick drift, you're going to want to mess around with this. If you don't have stick drift, you don't really need to touch it. Personally, my controller does not have any stick drift, so I have left mine at 20. I have left mine at the default. The only way to test this really is to go ahead and look in game and see if you're sort of looking around by yourself, or in Warzone, if you open up the map, if your cursor starts to, you know, drag down the screen a little bit, you're going to have some stick drift. You're going to want to mess around with that and turn it up more to see if and when it's going to stop at a certain point, and then that's how you're going to find like your best dead zone setting. So unfortunately, this is not a universal one. You are going to have to test this one out for yourself. Now, getting into sensitivity, once again, this is a setting that you're going to have to find your comfort zone with, but personally, I would recommend using some sort of medium sensitivity. We can go all the way up to 20 in this game, so personally, I do use an 8 and a 7. This is going to allow me to stay on target in close range fights, in medium range fights, and also in long range fights too, because up close, if somebody's running right next to me, you don't want to have a low sensitivity, otherwise you're not going to be able to follow them with your sights, or sometimes even with your hip fire. So you want to have it high enough so that you can trace up close. However, you don't want to have it too high, because then in long range engagements, it's going to be harder to stay on target. So you want to find a nice middle ground there, and personally, I think 8 and 7 is really, really good for that. Then I do also use a 0.9 ADS multiplier on high zoom and low zoom, just so I can be a bit more accurate when I do aim down sights. Then when it comes to aim response curve type, I am always going to recommend linear, because this is going to be the most consistent curve type we have. Basically, linear is going to feel the same no matter what, whether you're spinning slow, whether you're spinning fast. it doesn't matter, it is always going to feel the same. Whereas standard and dynamic are going to be a little bit more inconsistent. They'll feel different at, when you're holding it to the far right compared to when you're just barely pushing it to the far right. Same thing with the left, up, down, doesn't matter. Basically, linear is 1-to-1. It's going to feel the same throughout, and that consistency, I think, makes it the best. Controller vibration, I personally play with disabled. I don't like my controller vibrating in my hands. Aim assist, I like to keep on standard. I personally just do not like the feel of focusing or precision. I know there's some cheese going on with focusing right now. I don't know what that's about, but I do use the standard one here. It does help in some situations. I know I feel it sometimes. I don't feel it other times. Sometimes aim assist just breaks completely. I don't know why that is, but it is an issue this year. Personally, though, standard is the way to go in my own opinion. Now, aim down sight behavior, hold, that's pretty standard. Same thing with equipment behavior. However, if you are playing in multiplayer, you probably want to have your use and reload behavior on tap to reload. That's the most natural one. But if you are playing in Warzone, contextual tap has got to be the way to go. You can loot faster, you can pick up stuff faster. Contextual tap just makes things so much easier. I can't stand switching back and forth between multiplayer and Warzone when I forget to change these settings because it messes me up all the time. So tap to reload in multiplayer, contextual tap in Warzone, write that down. Then for slide behavior, I would always have this one set to tap. Holding just makes things more difficult, especially when it comes to slide canceling. That is obviously something you want to learn for multiplayer and Warzone as well, and having this set to tap makes that so much easier. And then the only other one that I really focus on here for movement is going to be the parachute auto deploy. Obviously, this is only relevant in Warzone, but basically, if you have this disabled, you can get closer to the ground without having to pull your chute. So off the rip, you can actually get to the ground and get to the loot faster than any enemy who actually has this enabled. So having this disabled is going to help out, but you gotta remember to actually pull your chute because it won't for you, and I've learned that the hard way several times. So there you have it. Those are the settings that I use here in Modern Warfare. Those are the settings that I truly think are the best to use in the entire game. For multiplayer, for Warzone, for console, for PC, you name it, that is what I use, and they've worked pretty well up until this point. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, or if you just found it helpful, let me know by dropping a like on it. And of course, if you guys are new here, we are on the road to 500,000 subscribers. If you like what you see, if you want to stay up to date with the latest Call of Duty news, intel, tips and tricks, best settings, best setups, everything going on with Call of Duty, you'll find it right here. So feel free to subscribe with your notifications turned on to stay up to date with all of that. Once again, thanks so much for tuning in. And until next time, take it easy, have an awesome rest of your day, and I'll catch you guys later. Peace out.